So once again, thank you for being here with us today for our NCST February Community Impact Briefing. My name is Raquel Reddy, Vice President of Community Development here at NCST. And along with me, I have my colleague Elizabeth Coates, our Director of Policy at NCST, and also Maureen Yap, who I will be formally introducing in just a second. But we are sharing with you today a very timely topic. And I think for those of us who have been hearing lots about the executive orders that have been taking place by the administration, the Trump administration, we will be working through what all of that means and the implications around housing, lending, and technology, especially in the AI space. And none other than our presenter, Maureen Yap, who's Vice President of Public Policy and the Senior Counsel for Fair Lending at National Fair Housing Alliance. Maureen, thanks so much for being here with us. We're going to be asking you to present in just a second, but let me officially share with everyone your bio, your background, and then we will be off and running. So Maureen Yap is Vice President, as I mentioned, Vice President of Public Policy and Senior Counsel for Fair Lending at the National Fair Housing Alliance. Maureen focuses on fair lending, financial technology, mortgage policy, and housing finance reform. Maureen has worked in fair housing and fair lending since 1995. Prior roles include working on a range of civil rights and consumer protection issues at the Federal Reserve Board, including leading the bank's fair lending enforcement section and founding the Unfair and Deceptive Acts or Practices section. Maureen was also an associate for the law firms of Relman Colfax, PLLC, and Buckley LLP. So once again, Maureen, thank you so much for being here with us, and such a great conversation to have today about what's happening. So with that, go ahead, and I'm going to pass this over to you. And please, for folks, we are going to be allowing you to answer or ask questions, Q&A, chat features. We will be doing that at the end of the presentation. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Raquel, and thanks so much to NCST for this opportunity to cover this important topic. Apologies in advance, I have a bit of a cold, so my voice does not sound great, so bear with me. I wanted to go over a few things of what we'll be doing in the next few minutes and what I won't be able to do. So what I won't be able to do is cover all of the activities that are going on. Things are happening at such a fast pace. Especially with respect to the lawsuits and the status of each lawsuit. So I will mention some of them. I definitely cannot cover all of them. Also, I can't really tell you what your organization should do. So I'll tell you a little bit about what NFHA is doing. I'll put some more links in the chat after I'm done. But every organization is different, and there's not just one way to address these issues. So having said that, we'll go ahead and get started. And on this first slide, we want to give you a little bit of background. So what we're going to be doing today is covering the executive orders. And as you know, a number of executive orders were sent off right immediately after President Trump was sworn in. And there's a couple things to know about executive orders. So the most important thing to know is that executive orders can't change law and they can't change the Constitution. So what they're meant to do is give the president an ability to work within the law and to sort of put some meat on the bones as maybe guidance to an agency, but they can't overturn the law. Authorizing a program or staffing is the job of the Congress under our Constitution, as well as authorizing appropriations. So to the extent that some of these executive orders try to change that, they are likely illegal, and organizations that follow these executive orders may face civil violations of civil rights or other laws. The other thing to know about these executive orders is that they track pretty closely with a document called Project 2025. And this has been around for a couple of years. It's about 900 pages long. And it laid out in great detail a plan for each agency and each mission of the federal government. It was authored by the Heritage Foundation, which is a nonprofit, and we would say an extremist think tank. And basically, these initiatives are meant to gut progress toward equity and to sort of turn upside down the way the government works and the way we think about civil rights. So what we're going to do right now is look at a summary of some of the executive orders and executive actions so far, some early reactions to that, and then some potential future actions based on what we know from Project 2025. So first here we have kind of 4 buckets, 4 categories. And this is how we structured at the National Fair Housing Alliance our policy priorities. And there's a link to our priorities there. And this also helps us kind of sort this fire hose of executive action into the areas that we are going to prioritize. So again, there is a lot happening, but it's helpful to have some sort of framework to work with. So the areas that we are working on include protecting established rights and freedoms, promoting fair and affordable housing for all, supporting robust civil rights protections for AI, and preserving checks and balances. So we're going to organize the thoughts around the executive actions according to these 4 categories. But spoiler alert, it's not really going the direction that we would hope. So the first category is established rights and freedoms, and within that we have 3 categories: diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, LGBTQ rights, and immigrant rights. So let's get started. So first, we have the executive actions that are geared toward eliminating diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. These were some of the executive orders that came out right out of the gate. And the directive here to the federal government was to terminate all discriminatory programs, including, quote, illegal DEI. And so one might say that illegal DEI, that the modifier illegal is very important, because if it's not illegal, then it shouldn't be terminated. And there's a series of different actions, including an OMB order to freeze funding, cancel grants, suspend grants, and contracts that have to do with DEI. And what we've learned in just a short time is that DEI seems to be a code for anything that's civil rights. So it's not typically how we would think of it, as promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, making sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to participate, an equitable opportunity. It goes well beyond that. And there are no definitions in these executive orders. So what we find is some of the agencies obeying in advance before they even know what these words mean. They have scrubbed their websites, put staff on leave, terminated programs, terminated contracts. So it is not a surprise that there are many, many, many lawsuits. What else they are doing also, to the extent that there's a federal contractor or grantee, they are making sure that they incur liability under the False Claims Act to certify that they do not operate any programs promoting DEI. Again, not a defined term. And of course, the False Claims Act provides for treble damages. So that would be a big issue, a big risk. And then the president is asking each agency to come up with a list of 9 DEI related, again, not defined, potential civil compliance investigation targets. So starting to target the private sector, large corporations, nonprofits, foundation for DEI, whatever that could mean. And we've already started to see that. Many of our local fair housing organizations have been affected. Either their funding was suspended, contracts have been terminated, etc. So there's not a lot in terms of understanding what's happening, but it's a big wave of actions, and it's cutting across the entire nation. I think something that some folks don't understand is the federal workforce is not just in DC. And then to the extent that there are contractors, those are all across the nation. So this will reverberate throughout small business, small legal aid organizations. It will reverberate across the entire country. So early reactions, Jamie Dimon, of the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, said, bring them on, in terms of threats of DEI lawsuits. And they and Goldman Sachs have not backed away from diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission issued a statement, Costco issued a statement where they emphasized that they have more than 300,000 employees who serve their members every day, and that this is an important business goal for them. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation also issued a statement regarding health and diversity. This is one of the lawsuits that you can track. And then just minutes ago, the National Fair Housing Alliance announced a lawsuit with National Urban League, Chicago Aid Foundation, and the lawsuit is being brought by NAACP, LDF, and Lambda Legal. So a lot of quick reaction to this issue, especially given that it's way broader than anyone really thinks of as diversity, equity, inclusion, or accessibility. Once again, I just have to emphasize that, for example, the fair housing work that we do, or that our local fair housing groups do, has been authorized by Congress and taken place under various administrations, Republican and Democrat, and that money is authorized by Congress. So it's not clear that these executive orders are constitutional or legal. Potential future actions that we should think about: disparate impact, which is a theory of discrimination. So Project 2025 would like to do away with that, even though that was upheld by the Supreme Court. They would also like to refocus the DOJ Civil Rights Division to use the full force of federal prosecutorial resources to investigate what they call that discrimination in violation of the Constitution. And that has already happened. The new AG, Pam Bondi, has been instructed to find civil rights targets in which they can bring discrimination lawsuits. So the other area of established rights and freedoms are for LGBTQ individuals. And this administration has been very clear on their stance on this issue. And so one of their first executive actions was to say that it's the policy of the United States to recognize two sexes, male and female. The sexes are not changeable and are grounded in fundamental and incontrovertible reality. Also, the new HUD Secretary, Scott Turner, one of his first actions was to say that his HUD administration would not enforce what's called the Equal Access Rule, which is a protection protecting sex on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. He said that this would get the government out of the way of the definitions that the Lord intended. And I'll put that press release in the chat. This also means that passports can't list other genders. And you may have heard of a Supreme Court case called Bostock, in which under an employment discrimination statute, the Supreme Court held that sex included sexual orientation and gender identity. And so what Project 2025 and the DOJ, the executive orders will instruct the DOJ is to issue guidance to what they call the misapplication of the Supreme Court's decision. So the CFPB with respect to the Equal Credit Opportunity Act and HUD with respect to the Fair Housing Act had issued guidance that prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sex there also included sexual orientation and gender identity. And that is part of NFHA's lawsuit. Also, again, targeting federal funds used to promote gender ideology. So a directive to cancel those sorts of contracts. Early reactions, you may have heard Archbishop Marion Edgar Buddy in a sermon to President Trump and his leadership asked to have mercy on the people in our country who are scared now. There are transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families who fear for their lives. Also, the EEOC issued a statement, and there are at least 2 lawsuits challenging this, plus the NFHA lawsuit. Sorry. So with respect to potential future actions, I think it's helpful to take a look at how Project 2025 and the authors that are in this administration really think about our American society. And so some of the things they have said are families comprised of a married mother, father, and their children are the foundation of a well-ordered nation and healthy society. They also went on to say working fathers are essential to the well-being and development of their children. In the overwhelming number of cases, fathers insulate children from physical and sexual abuse, financial difficulty or poverty, and a host of behavioral and psychological problems. HHS, or Health and Human Services, should prioritize married father engagement in its messaging, health, and welfare policies. So it's important to be really familiar with Project 2025 so you can see where all of these policies are headed. And I'm starting to run out of time, so I'll go a little bit faster. So rolling back established rights and freedoms for immigrants, and can't emphasize that enough. These are established rights and freedoms that people have been operating under for decades. They may be law, they may be constitutional, but these are things that people are accustomed to relying on. So one of the things that the executive order did was to terminate the constitutional right to birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment. That has also been challenged. Declare a national emergency so that the government can use the military to implement mass deportation, delegating enforcement to local law enforcement, and terminating public benefits for the undocumented. And again, undermining, pausing, suspending any contracts, grants, or other agreements that are meant to help immigrants in the country legally. So early reactions, a Reagan appointee said he'd been on the bench for over 4 decades and could not remember another case where the question presented was as clear as this one with respect to birthright citizenship, and said this was a blatantly unconstitutional order. And folks who are more up on these cases, because I really could not track everyone, feel free to put that information in the chat. Just an example, a local police chief in Grand Rapids, Michigan, said that there are clear lines in place and they're just not in the immigration business. And then here's a list of some of the other actions that have been taken. So with respect to Project 2025, what we at the National Fair Housing Alliance are also watching is they direct HUD to prohibit non-citizens and federally assisted housing, which is a broad swath of housing. And so to carefully look at that, non-citizens doesn't mean undocumented. It means only citizens could live in federally assisted housing. And there could not be any mixed status family where one person is a citizen, but the rest of the family is not. Everyone would have to be a citizen. So with respect to fair and affordable housing, I think the key takeaway here is that we all know there is a fair and affordable housing crisis right now. The costs of housing, both rental and purchase, is skyrocketing. And we have more fair housing discrimination complaints than ever before. But so far, the administration has engaged in performative actions that will not lower costs. So they issued an executive order ordering the agencies to deliver emergency price relief, but without funds or any authority to do anything. And they also renamed the Gulf of America. So that doesn't really take the cost of housing down. The other things that are likely to increase the cost of housing or have a significant impact on people trying to get housing is tariffs attacking immigrants who typically provide much needed housing construction, attacking the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, attacking HUD, and suspending the disbursement of funds under the Inflation Reduction Act and Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So what we would expect to see is more of the same: attacks on the CFPB and HUD, attacks on appraisal reform, and attacks on disparate impact, affirmatively furthering fair housing, and special purpose credit programs. The next section is civil rights protections for AI. And what we've seen here is not as much to do with the executive orders per se, but what continues to happen with respect to DOJ. So the executive orders rescinded Biden's executive order on creating a safe, secure, and trustworthy development of AI in the federal government. And they want to develop AI systems that are, in their words, free from ideological bias or engineered social agendas. But we all know that AI is the next civil rights frontier. And if you like the historical treatment of people of color and women, then you're going to love AI. Because without any guardrails, the AI will just be trained on the historical patterns, which are not great for women and people of color. So what the executive orders have done is lift any auditing framework or any kind of framework that put up guardrails. And then Doge and Elon Musk teams are going agency to agency, scooping up data. They hope to feed it into AI. And they're just sort of doing, it's not even really AI, they're doing like a control F for the words that they believe symbolize waste, fraud, and abuse, or diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, without really any human intervention, without any guardrails. So here we can kind of expect more of the same. Also, the use of data, stopping the collection of race ethnicity data, so we can't see how the impact on communities, undermining the citizenship, the census with respect to a citizenship question, heavily increasing surveillance of women, for example, ensuring that every state reports exactly how many abortions, however that's defined, take place, the gestational age of the child, for what reason, the mother's state of residence, and what method. And again, none of these have definitions, so it's not clear how that would work. So I think also we want to make sure that we let go of the idea that this is to create a smaller, less intrusive government. This isn't kind of like the traditional Republican framework. This is weaponizing data, AI, and the government's power in a way that is much more intrusive, much more invasive to the average person in America. And then finally, checks and balances. And this includes paralyzing the rulemaking process. All rulemakings have been frozen, yet there are some rulemakings going on, so it's not exactly clear what's happening. The effective date of any rules or regulatory action. And to be clear, they define rule extremely broadly. So any agency action basically has been frozen, delaying the effective date. And a new rule can only be promulgated after identifying at least 10 existing rules to be repealed. Now, the executive order says identify, but we've already learned from some agencies that they intend to also repeal, again, to over comply with the order, even though that's not what the order says. And then, of course, especially if you're in DC, you're aware that they are traumatizing and gutting the federal workforce. Pretty much every day, there's a new initiative that managers and the workforce are subject to, including return to in-office work, even though some agencies have sold off their buildings and don't have buildings or parking anymore, instituting a hiring freeze, and then rescinding pending offers, especially if you're in the agency's 1 to 2 year probationary period, sending employees repeated requests to resign, even independent agencies, reclassifying policymaking positions under what they had called Schedule F to make it easier to fire if you're not loyal to the president, and then conducting some high-profile firings and suspensions. Now, of course, there's been a lot of litigation already about this, and we continue to see that. We also saw some of the senators oppose OMB Director Russell Vought, who was one of the authors of Project 2025, and who was the one who literally said, we want to traumatize federal employees and make them understand that they won't want to go to work because they are the villain now. We would expect continued actions to remove the federal workforce, make it less efficient. There doesn't seem to be, again, a lot of guidance or thoughtful approach They fired some of the nuclear engineers and those who were in charge of inspecting for the bird flu, and then had to hire them back because it turns out that they actually needed them. So that is the presentation for today. Folks who have updates on any of these cases, please feel free to add that to the chat. There's only so much that my brain could hold. We also have an appendix here for each of these sections, and we are happy to take questions.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much, Maureen, for that. Lots of really important information. As Maureen mentioned, we are ready for your questions, and we do have a few that have come in. So let's start with the first one from an anonymous attendee. With a reduction in federal funding for HUD, do you expect delays for existing Section 8 payments or a pause in issuance of new vouchers?
To be honest, we don't know what to expect. Again, because this is not thoughtful or constitutional or legal, because they're supposed to be, an agency can do, for example, a reduction in force, but there has to be a thoughtful method to it. So we can expect, though, interruptions in service of all kinds. For some of our local fair housing group members, what we have seen is the way that they work is they do the work and then they ask HUD to reimburse them for the work that they've done. So some of them do provide help people getting housing vouchers, help seniors, persons with disabilities get housing. So these agencies are doing the best that they can to continue to provide the work, but there's just no guarantee about how any of these programs will continue to work.
Thank you for that. We have another question here. Can you explain the legal risks of complying with an executive order that is later ruled to be illegal?
Sure. So I think, for example, the Fair Housing Act. So let's say you provide a program, you have a contract with a local fair housing group to provide training on the Fair Housing Act for landlords, for example, and you cancel the contract without paying the local fair housing group, you could have a breach of contract because the Fair Housing Act is a law. So if you try to comply in advance with something labeled DEI, just so you can avoid being a target, you could still be sued. You could still be sued for breach of contract. You could still be sued under the Fair Housing Act. The Fair Housing Act is still a law. So if you fail to be inclusive in your housing and, for example, fail to provide a reasonable accommodation, it might be that this new DOJ won't honor that case, or HUD won't process it. It won't become an election case at DOJ, but the local fair housing group might be able to sue you because an executive order, again, does not overturn the law. So private actors have to be really careful when thinking about obeying in advance to executive orders that are not defined, because the law is still the law.
Mhm. Thanks, Maureen. Let's check our chat feature. We've got a couple questions I think that showed up there. Let's see. One consideration is that we have been leaning heavily into the concept of constitutionality and legality, but what is legal is what is enforced, and the Constitution is only as strong as the human support behind it. Are you aware of any institutional efforts to strengthen the enforcement of both the law and the Constitution?
Yes, so I think, when my section is done, I'll put some more links in the chat. So there are actions in federal court, and then you can't forget that there's the states and local actors, private plaintiffs, class action. So again, these executive orders do not overturn the law, and they don't, it has never been the case that only the Department of Justice, for example, could bring a lawsuit. The state AGs have standing in a lot of the civil rights laws. So private entities need to be really careful and thinking about the legal risk that they have, not just from the federal government, but from states, from localities, from private plaintiffs, local civil rights groups that would have standing to sue. Oh, I can't hear you, Raquel. Can you try again? I'm
Sorry
sorry.
about that. Okay, let's see if I can you hear me now? Have you heard whether or not the Trump administration is going after regulations that came from PAVE task force, like reconsideration of value?
Yes, so that's a great question. So PAVE is an interagency task force that the Biden administration stood up to address appraisal bias. And it was specifically called out in Project 2025, which is odd because it's not that well known. So the PAVE action plan has already been taken off of the HUD website even before Scott Turner was confirmed. Now, in terms of rolling that back, again, I'm not really sure. So there was guidance and some rules issued regarding what's called reconsideration of value when a consumer asks for a reconsideration of the value because they believe that the appraiser, missed some of the comps that would speak to the value of their home. So again, even if that's ruled back, there's still compliance management systems that are supposed to be in place. And if an entity has a weak compliance management system and doesn't have any process for reconsideration of value, that opens up a huge legal risk. And that can point to whether or not that entity is serious about preventing discrimination. We already have two denial of motion to dismiss in federal district court saying that those types of facts are violations of the Fair Housing Act, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. So folks, again, need to think carefully. There is a lot of noise about what the executive orders are doing, and that's the most high profile. And we do count on the Department of Justice to kind of lead the way in civil rights. But even if they're not, these laws have not been overturned. And just like the Reagan appointee said, just because it's an executive order doesn't mean that it's constitutional or that it's legal.
Thank you for that. I think we have answered our chat. Let me go back into Q&A. All right, that's clear. Okay, I think we have answered everyone's questions. Let me also just double check. I think someone may have raised their hand.
There are two questions also that someone put in the chat just directly to the hosts and panelists, which I can read since
Okay.
it's in front of me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Does anyone have any leads on private philanthropy that is funding affordable housing? Maureen, do you have any sense of some private actors that are supporting this work?
Thankfully, I do not do the fundraising, but what I would say is to check in with the person who does the fundraising for your organization, and also start monitoring the lists. NAACP has a list, others have lists of the organizations who have said that they would maintain their commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion. There's going to be a lot of requests to private funders as these grants are taken away. Even if they're illegal, it takes a while to get through the courts to get the money back.
And the second one, just quickly in that same method of question delivery, and then we've got some others in the Q&A function. Is there a trustworthy national organization or news source that is keeping track of these EOs in real time?
The EOs, yes. So the EOs you can go to if you just put in the search engine White House executive orders. And the White House is doing a pretty good job of listing the executive orders. It's kind of fun every night, like a new one comes out. So last night, the executive order was that only the president and AG Pam Bondi can interpret the law. So all those thousands of lawyers across the US who work at different agencies, their word doesn't count anymore. So that's fun. You can always go to the White House executive orders. With respect to the lawsuits, I'll give you two. I don't think my chat feature works, but I will give you two sources. JustSecurity.org, so that's justsecurity.org, has a executive order litigation tracker, and they're doing a great job of sorting it. Like we said, it's helpful to have a sorting mechanism because there's so much coming in, and then also giving the update. Also, Democracy Forward has the Democracy 2025 tracker that is also providing updates, especially from a civil rights and consumer advocate perspective.
Maureen, I apologize about that. I think you are okay now to, if you have any other links that you want to put in, you can add them there for everyone.
Okay,
And
I'll add them when it's
yeah,
not my turn anymore.
I think we got, yeah. All right. I think we have
Oh.
one more question in the Q&A from Spencer Woodyard. Can you explain a little bit more about the False Claims Act?
Sure. So long ago, not long ago, but quite a while ago, there was a case in Westchester, New York that used the False Claims Act and said that, and I'm not the expert in this, the Relman Colfax team is, but I'll give you the high level. So what the False Claims Act means that when you make a representation to the United States, that it has to be correct. And if it's not correct, you can be sued for treble damages. And so in the Westchester case, the False Claims Act was used when I believe it was Westchester represented that they were affirmatively furthering fair housing. And of course, if somebody knows more about that, just kind of put it in the chat. But the idea is the administration is hoping to just sort of short circuit the gathering of evidence by requiring that every new contract that the contractor or grantee has to certify, say the word certify, that they are not doing any DEI work. Of course, again, DEI means diversity, equity, inclusion. That's not against the law. And those terms are not defined. So to the extent folks still do have a contract or a grant with the federal government, this executive order will require them to certify that, which puts them on the hook under the False Claims Act for treble, which just means 3 times the normal amount of damages.
Thank you for that, Maureen. I think we've gotten all the Q&A and the chat questions to you. I know that folks had asked this. I just want to reiterate that we do provide an archive of our community impact briefings. If you go to www.ncst.org under media and then video gallery, you'll find this recording up in about 24 to 48 hours. Maureen, you also are leaving an additional one pager for folks to see. I don't know if that is something you want to share now or just that we'll include for additional presentation needs. And I would say just again, thank you so much for presenting on this topic. And I'm sure it is not going to slow down anytime soon. So we've just got to pay attention. And if anybody does have any other questions, feel free to get in touch with either National Fair Housing Alliance or NCST to help connect you with the right folks. With that, I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Coates, our Director of Policy, to provide any regulatory or legislative updates that you'd like at this time.
Thanks, Raquel, and thank you, Maureen, for that thorough overview. It's very important to see how the plans that have been generated on the campaign trail then turn out to impact what it is that those of us that depend on federal funds or certainly are recipients or stakeholders of federal policy are then impacted by that messaging in those plans. So we hope that this is something that has been of value to you as you and your organization are assessing what it is that that impact means. And speaking of the impact, the Homeownership Alliance, which is the trade association or advocacy coalition that NCST manages under our policy platform, we are a group of nonprofits that focus on affordable home ownership. And that is 100% of the discussions that it is that we are partaking in. How is it that funding freezes? How is it that the executive orders? How is it that perhaps mixed messaging from the administration is impacting your day-to-day work? Are you seeing a loss of contracts? Are you seeing some of your day-to-day operations grind to a halt? Are you seeing the maybe person that you relied on in a certain department all of a sudden not able to be as clear with you on what the directions are for you maybe executing on federal funds or a grant or a loan or something like that? That information is very important for not only us to know as we are crafting our policy platform and our policy objectives and messaging, but I'm always encouraging, and this is advice if you are a member or if you are a member of the Homeownership Alliance or not, please inform your member of Congress. It might not necessarily seem that there is a differentiation between the party leaders in Congress versus the party leaders in the administration. But at the end of the day, they answer to their voters and they answer to their constituents, those that represent you in the legislature. So I strongly recommend, if this information spooks you, if this information is something that you feel you want to come to a call to action. And what I would say, especially if you are seeing an impact on your operations, ensure to let them know that this is something that is a detriment to the furtherance of affordable housing, of fair housing, of what it is your operations look like. So if these are conversations that you think you can continue to benefit from, if you are interested in how it is that NCST and the Homeownership Alliance are taking action, I'm throwing in the chat some more information about the Homeownership Alliance. We are actively recruiting. We have a number of different initiatives taking place. We are working on a response to the HUD request for information on insurance and resiliency. That executive action or that regulatory-esque initiative has not been taken down by HUD, I think because leaders across parties know that this is an important issue. So that is something that the Homeownership Alliance members are working on. If that's something that you're interested in, I hope that you'll be in touch. I will also put the Homeownership Alliance interest form in there as well. So again, if you are a nonprofit, if you're focused on homeownership supply in particular, we want to have your voice part of our coalition. We want to be able to hear from you, from your impacts, from your expertise, as the Homeownership Alliance is what galvanizes and furthers NCST's policy priorities. That's how we ensure that whatever it is that we're pushing for in Congress and the administration is actually going to work on the ground. The time it could not be more fitting, particularly with the administration's at least discussions around supporting affordable housing supply. It's clear that there is a little bit more guidance that's required. And the best way in my mind that guidance can come from is from those of you that are doing this practitioner level work on the ground. Perhaps something to lift the mood a little bit, if that's something that you're feeling. We are also focusing on what it is that's taking place in Congress as far as an upcoming tax package. Now, there's lots of different approaches across the House and the Senate on which direction they want to take. And the president has also weighed in with his opinions that may or may not throw some things off course. But whenever it is that there is a tax legislation that is coming up to the floor, rest assured that NCST will be focused on the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. NCST co-chairs the Neighborhood Homes Coalition alongside our two national partners, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, as well as the National Association of Affordable Housing Lenders. If you've seen me speak on these calls before, you know that we have a coalition website that we've established where you can be able to see what the impact would be of this bill in your census tract and in your communities. This would be the first of its kind federal tax credit to support affordable homeownership development. Any of you all doing affordable housing work know that there is a vast need for this type of investment. This is a resource that will be flexible. It is one that will further public-private partnerships, and it is one that we have ensured that nonprofit practitioners can be able to use on the ground. We're having some very successful conversations with the four bill leads, House and Senate, Republican and Democrat. We're taking a two-pronged approach where we look to introducing the base bill that everybody can sign on to, so we can point to a fix, a quick fix, or at least a substantial and a monumental fix for our affordable housing and homeownership issues that we're facing on the ground, as well as looking to this party line approach that congressional Republicans are taking with what's called the budget reconciliation process. What that really means is that all Republicans will be able to vote just on party line and to be able to bring through the priorities that they seek. There, again, are different interpretations on what that scope would be, but as long as there is a tax item, we are working in lockstep with the Republican bill leads to ensure that neighborhood homes is a part of that package. So if that is anything that you might see as reassuring that there is affordable housing work being done in this sort of a broader swath of updates and legal and constitutional haziness, know that there does remain a stalwart support for affordable homeownership, and NCST is making sure that at every step of the way that neighborhood homes remains a top priority. Any other questions on our policy work or on anything Homeownership Alliance related? I've just put my email in the chat, and you can please feel free to reach out to me. I see another question. Is there still an effort to advocate for Newmarket's permanency, since that has been used for affordable homeownership successfully? Absolutely, yes. That piece of legislation has been reintroduced on a bipartisan and bicameral basis, something we're very excited about. And Senator Warner has taken up the mantle of the Newmarket's tax credit approach from retiring Senator Carter. He's very interested in furthering this. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he has noted support for this. So that is also a push that we do believe is going to be one included in the tax package. That is something that is an existing tax credit. So the lift to be able to include that, while is one that we're focusing on, is not quite to the same degree as neighborhood homes, which would be a brand new policy, one that is not yet in the tax code. So if there's a question as to why it is that we are focusing on neighborhood homes, is because that advocacy work is a bit longer of a road than an existing policy like Newmarket's. But rest assured, that is certainly an effort that we are taking on as well.
Elizabeth, I think we have gotten through all the questions. So once again, Elizabeth, thank you so much. Again, thanks to Maureen Yap for your presentation today. Please reach out to us, as Elizabeth indicated, if you're going through anything, within your organization, or you're hearing anything within your communities, please let us know. Would like to give you a little bit of time back, but also let you know that we do have our next community impact briefing on March the 19th. So look out for an invitation from us. And if you have any questions in the meantime, don't hesitate to reach out to NCST. Thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.